back to part two of our special two-part episode all about ADHD and women in the workplace. We have Erica Mohle back with us today to deep dive further into the life of women with ADHD, but now we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about ADHD superpowers and how it really benefits everybody when you introduce neurodiverse individuals in the workplace. So, thank you, Erica. Welcome back. And thanks,
Thanks so
everyone, for
much.
joining us again.
Thank you for
Thanks.
having
I,
me.
I had a kind of exactly specific question around what is the research showing around we always think that this is a bad thing, right? Or it's a negative thing, or it's a a disease or so of some sort. And I think why are we so hyper focused on? And I don't know if this is in both men and women, but in people that are diagnosed with ADHD, why we're expecting them to be all things. In the last episode, Tanya mentioned, okay, well, I'm really strong in this area, but my kitchen's a mess, or what have you. And I'm thinking to myself, why wouldn't we just say, I'm great in this area and validate that, support that, yeah, my bedroom's messy. Or
Mhm.
I can't find my keys for the life of me. So I'd like to, and so maybe going back into that superpower, why aren't we celebrating the positives of being hyper focused in certain areas or whatever that brings to that individual, workplaces, family, school, etc., instead of looking at this thing like there's something wrong with the person.
Beautiful question. So yeah, I'll go two parts. I'll go, why the heck does this happen? And then I'll go, let's talk more about the superpowers. And so for any difference, for any group of the population that is not the majority, we've evolved as people to have this fear of difference. So if you think about way back in the past, and you can Google the Dunbar effect if it's interesting to you, but essentially we were really accustomed to kind of having like 200 people that we really knew well. And if we would encounter a group that was outside of that 200 people, we would respond with fear because we didn't know them. They're not safe to us. And so that actually did help us to survive because we could be more cognizant of whether or not we could trust this other person. And so, from a psychology perspective, when something is different, right? Like when a person shows up and is losing things all the time, whatever it is, we have this response as individuals to say this is different and therefore it is bad. This is also the underpinnings for things like racism that persists,
Mhm.
any of the isms, any of
Mhm.
the systems of oppression. And so when it comes to ADHD, that's at least in part what underlies why we have that expectation that everybody needs to be able to show up with a clean home and not speeding on the highway, whatever it is. It's probably good not to speed, but in this really sort of robotic way. And so that's part of why we have expectations for others, that everybody needs to show up in this really non-diverse way. And it's then what we are internalized for ourselves and why masking occurs. So some of the things, and as we're sort of alluding to, part of how we can work against that for any diverse group. And today, of course, we're talking about ADHD. And Jen, as you mentioned, absolutely for any gender identity of person who experiences ADHD, this is going to be true. What we see is that folks with ADHD tend to be very good big picture thinkers. And that's often why there's some stats that show that potentially up to 25% of executives have ADHD. This
Mhm.
is, we definitely need to corroborate this evidence to be more clear on that. But, and this ability, because part of what an ADHD brain can do is associative thinking. And that has to do with the tangents, right? Where it's like, oh, you talked about this, and it reminded me of this, and I'll talk about this, and I'll
Mhm.
come back. And that associative thinking is part of what contributes to this big picture. It also, another strength that ADHDers tend to come forward with is the ability to innovate and to be really creative, right? And,
Mhm.
and this, I notice this in my life that sometimes when I do this, even in my personal life, people don't like it because it's not how
Mhm.
their brains work or it's different. And it can be so helpful, absolutely in our personal lives, but and especially in our work lives, because often, and this is why also at times, this is not research supported, this is just anecdata from me working with my clients and talking to people and being ADHD myself. We like to have quite a bit of power and control over the way things work because of this creativity and innovation. So it's really hard. Like, honestly, this is something that comes up with my coaching clients sometimes is I know I need to, and it's beneficial to the organization for me to follow this process, but I really don't want to because I don't see that it's useful. And
Mhm.
so sometimes that's some things that we'll do coaching about. But this ability to be innovative and creative, number two. Number three, of course, there's going to be many more than what I list, but passion. And that's another big strength, right, for leaders is that because ADHDers have these deep feelings, sometimes it's challenging, but also sometimes they're very excitable. We can get really excited about what the change we want to see in the world. And then we can bring people along. It becomes infectious. And as we know, as leaders, this is really big. Maybe the last one I'll mention, although of course there's so many, is also the cognitive empathy
Mhm.
and the emotional empathy. So cognitive empathy being I can understand how another person thinks. Emotional
Mhm.
empathy being I can understand how another person feels.
Mhm.
And very often, and there's tricky bits for all of these as well, but ADHDers, including ADHD leaders, they can be very good with people and very good at leading individuals because of their ability to perspective take and kind of have
Mhm.
this intuition that helps them bring people along as well.
Yeah.
Those are four of the big
Wow,
ones
good
that I see.
answer. Yeah.
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 So you mentioned emotional leaders and passion, or maybe you mentioned passion, sorry, and I go to emotional leaders. And we talked about this just on a podcast not too long ago, or a recording that we did about sometimes being told you're over emotional. So going back to your coaching background, how does that what would you say to a female, or in this case, because we are panel female, so we're gonna, use you while you're here. Um,
Heck yeah.
how do you help us deal with that?
Such a great question. So usually often the first question I'll ask when that comes forward, that comes forward, of course, for any woman, including ADHD women leading in the workplace,
Yeah.
is what outcome do you want?
Mm.
And
Mm.
so the reason I start with that question is because then we get clear on some people will say, I'm good to get fired. Some people will say, I'm CEO, so I can do whatever the heck I want to do. Some people
Mhm.
will say, I want to proceed with caution because that is actually going to protect me and my team. And so part of what I'm hearing you name, but help me correct me, Helen, if I'm getting it wrong, is that we, of course, as women, are navigating the current system of the patriarchy, which still judges what is considered to be stereotypically feminine, including experiencing and showing emotion. And
Mhm.
so, as you're naming, like here we are in this system, it is tricky. It would be wonderful if we could show up and just be like, well, screw you. I'm just going to show up as I am.
Mhm.
And the reality is that we do exist in this system and that we can empower ourselves. I know empowerment sometimes is an overused word to decide how we want to
Mhm.
strategically show up, considering.
Right. And I think the one thing I can add, or I would like to add, is not only does that allow us empowerment, but what we are now empowering those individuals in the room after we've left your great session and we've now gone back to our regular day lives in our offices or wherever we are, take that empowerment back and give it back and let people know that, you know what, it's okay to be indifferent, if that's the way we're going to label it, or be the ADH diagnosis that we've received, it's okay. But also that emotional piece is it's okay. It's That's who you are.
Yes. And that you can say that with words, and you can also model that as you're naming in the
Yeah.
way that you show up. And you can also give them context like, hey, I notice your direct reports. I notice I show up in these meetings in this way because of this. With
Mhm.
me, you get to show up in these ways. And then, of course,
Mm.
consciously reward those behaviors so that people believe you as I'm
Mhm.
hearing you name.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
So much there. So much there in
Mhm.
terms of this being season three of this podcast
Season
and some
four.
of the season four.
We're season
Some
four
of
now.
the early conversations we've
Mhm.
had with female leaders around being very clear on what you want, right? What they want, self-advocacy. And I think if that just stuck out when you're talking, because you can see kind of how these things, whether it's masking or whether it's, you know, um, emotional or whatever those things are, it's like these are competing almost behaviors. It's like, and then you wonder why you're sitting in this purgatory. It's so, again, easier said than done to sit here and say, I'm making this choice regardless of the consequences, a loss of a job, a loss of a marriage, whatever all those things actually look like. However, right, that we do keep coming back to that after season 4, right? So,
We are
Good.
coming up on time now, but I do want to do our quick round as we do with everybody. But this is an ADHD quick round
okay.
before we close it up. And Erica, there's still so much we want to cover. So at some point, we'd love to have you back for maybe a part 3 or just like even a different topic on executive women in the workplace. And like you said, navigating within the patriarchy. And
I,
that's masking,
yeah,
regardless of whether or not you're neurodivergent, you're masking. If you're a person of color, if you're not of the majority, you're masking in some way, shape, or form. So we'd love
I,
to have you
I
back to
say
kind of.
let's do a viewers quest Q&A.
Yes, that is
I would love that.
amazing. Would you love that, Erica?
I would.
Yes.
Mhm.
Awesome. All right, so we'll put it up all over social media when season 4 comes out. But let's do it. Let's do the quick round.
Great. Okay. What's one misconception about ADHD you wish you could erase forever?
Is this for Erica or is it for everybody?
You.
You.
Oh gosh,
Sorry.
I just love it. That it's a character flaw.
Mm,
Oh,
mhm. Yeah.
What's, I mean, I think we talked about this, but what's your favorite ADHD superpower?
Our ability to innovate. I love that.
I like that. One thing you wish women with ADHD would forgive themselves for.
Understandably, it's internalized because of current societal systems and for being themselves.
Mm.
Agree.
Thank you. Thank you, Erica, for coming on to our two-parter episode. Thank you to all of our listeners today. Please, we will have Erica back at some point. So if there are questions or you want to learn more about anything specific, please DM us your questions and we will do a Q&A round. Maybe we can actually do a live Q&A round on LinkedIn. That would be pretty cool.
That would be
We
cool.
are going to link some resources, ADHD resources that Erica kindly sent our way. If you're thinking that maybe this episode really resonated with you, or you know someone else that this may help, we will link that all in the description box and on our LinkedIn page. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Erica.
Thanks so much. What a pleasure, all.